Heading into week 9, our understanding of usage and deployments are about as good as they're going to get. Today, we are going to continue our love-hate series, as I look into 3 players I'm looking to start everywhere, and 3 players I'm trying to sit. But before we dig in, head over to 4for4.com, use promo code YouTube to get yourself 25% off any subscription plan. Start DeAndre Hopkins. Though the interior of the Chiefs' offensive line is the strength of the unit, comprising 3 of the best options at their respective positions, the tackle duo of Jawan Taylor and Wanya Morris should get their due as well. Taylor, in particular, is having a great second season in Kansas City, allowing 3 pressures in only 2 games, 2 or less in the remaining 6 games, while allowing only 1 sack on the year. He also just blanked Max Crosby, who entered the contest with 7 sacks on the year in Week 8. This week's opponent, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, certainly don't have a Max Crosby, and they don't have a secondary to shy away from either. The Bucs are allowing the 9th highest QB rating on the year, with opposing passing attacks are averaging 274.9 yards per game, the 4th highest. This matchup bodes well for the newly acquired DeAndre Hopkins, who earned only 3 targets in his first game, though he ran only 14 routes, the same amount as Mecole Hardman, and 1 less than Kareem Hunt. We assumed that he wouldn't get used a ton just days after getting traded to the team, but with Marquise Brown, Rashee Rice, and Juju Smith-Schuster all sidelined with various injuries, that should change quickly. Per head coach Andy Reid after last week's game, quote, "He wanted to be in there more, which is a positive. I understand. He'll get more chances in the next game." Hopkins should be considered something closer to a full-time player in Week 9, which pushes him up into wide receiver 3 consideration. Start Chuba Hubbard. Targeting the Panthers in any sense seems a little ridiculous right now, but things are lining up well for Chuba Hubbard against an equally struggling New Orleans Saints. Sure, the team just shipped off their best skill position player by sending Deontay Johnson up to Baltimore, and Bryce Young seems like he's got a pretty good shot to start again here in Week 9, but the Saints' run defense has been brutal as of late. Over the last 4 games, New Orleans has allowed 190.8 yards on the ground, while allowing the 3rd highest yards per attempt and suffering a 13.6% broken plus missed tackle rate, the 6th highest in the league. If there's been one bright spot on this Panthers campaign, other than Andy Dalton, it's been their run blocking, particularly in the center of the formation, where the addition of guards Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis has been fruitful. If we disregard the first matchup between these 2 teams, when Carolina was still giving Miles Sanders and Mike Boone opportunities in a blowout loss, Hubbard has been on a tear. In the following 7 games, the running back has averaged 19.7 opportunities per game for 98.1 total yards and 3.4 receptions. Though there have been rumblings of Jonathan Brooks possibly playing for the first time this week, it would fly in the face of head coach Dave Canales commenting it could be on the possibility that Brooks doesn't play this year at all. It would be quite the quick turnaround to get him a ton of action less than a week after saying there's a possibility we don't see him until 2025. Fire up Hubbard as an RB2 once again. Start Darnell Mooney. Hopefully you didn't drop Kyle Pitts, and hopefully you didn't write off Darnell Mooney's career resurgent performances. Both came through in Week 8, with Pitts looking like a man possessed on at least 2 of his 4 catches. Mooney now sits as a locked-in wide receiver 2 option in good matchups after hitting 10-plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 7 games, and will look to continue putting up juicy box scores for at least these next 2 games, with the Cowboys up next. Much of the Cowboys' woes on defense can be attributed to injuries, but it looks as though they'll get at least 1 more week of aggressively targeting them in fantasy matchups. Since Parsons went down back in Week 4, the Cowboys have a 30.2% pressure rate, while opposing quarterbacks have a pristine 120 QB rating, the highest mark in the league over that span. The Falcons' offensive line, who've allowed the 9th lowest adjusted sack rate, are more than capable of handling this thin defensive front, which puts all the usual suspects, Pitts, Mooney, Drake London, and even Kirk Cousins in must-start territory unless you have a top 3 option to place ahead of them. Sit Wan'Dale Robinson. I found myself rooting for the Daniel Jones underdog story for the better part of 2 years now, but I fear the writing is on the wall in dark ink. Jones is once again near the bottom of pretty much any quarterback metric you care to look at and is still brutal when facing pressure. Among 37 qualifying quarterbacks, Jones ranks 32nd in QB rating and 34th in yards per attempt in a dirty pocket. That in and of itself wouldn't be so terrible if the Giants didn't rank 30th in pressure rate allowed, continuing a trend that has held strong for years now. While Wan'Dale Robinson has seen 20 targets from Jones when the QB is under pressure, he has only turned them into 10 receptions and 69 yards, or 3.4 yards per target. Among 45 receivers who have seen at least 10 targets in those under pressure scenarios, Robinson ranks 44th, placing above only the Raiders' Trey Tucker. With left tackle Andrew Thomas forced to set his sights on the 2025 season, it's safe to assume a lot of the pass attempts coming from Jones will continue to be under pressure. This severely lowers Robinson's already low ceiling, and a healthy Malik Neighbors isn't helping matters. Wan'Dale has topped 10 points in non-full PPR leagues twice this season, with one of those games coming when Neighbors was sidelined with his concussion. Consider Robinson a deep league PPR-only play in Week 9. Sit Rachaad White. We were supposed to be met with a dreaded three-headed backfield in Week 8, but it really didn't pan out that way. Sean Tucker, the presumed third back of this monster, ran only 3 routes with 1 target, while stealing 5 more offensive snaps to the tune of 2 carries for 3 yards. And while the team scored 26 points and Rachaad White was heavily involved in the passing game, he would have had a performance to forget had he not found the end zone on a receiving score. White took 6 targets for 5 catches, 38 yards, and that touchdown, but only ran the ball 6 times, including a lost fumble on his second touch of the game. This came despite Tucker spending most of the game on the sidelines and Bucky Irving not being cleared to play until Friday afternoon. When asked about the situation during Monday's press conference, head coach Todd Bowles said, quote, "I think it'll change every week. You know, when we get behind, that was probably less Tucker's thing. But he's going to get more touches, he's going to get more plays, and more reps." End quote. We could chalk that up to coach speak if we wanted to, but what we can't sweep under the rug is the Chiefs' defense that ranks first in schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. Kansas City is allowing 82.3 rushing yards per game, the second lowest mark in the league. Though the Bucs could once again be playing from behind here, it's not worth risking our second RB slot on someone who could be sharing the load with 2 teammates. Sit Tua Tagovailoa. It was mostly a feel-good story upon Tua's return in Week 8, but it ended up finishing in heartbreak as Arizona's Chad Ryland sunk a 34-yard field goal with time expiring to sink Miami to 2-5 on the season. It was a pretty good showing for the quarterback off the IR due to his concussion, and he was dinged with only 1 turnover where they passed on his 40 dropbacks, while he helped Tyreek Hill eclipse 70 yards receiving for only the second time this season. While Tyreek should be to be started as a wide receiver 1 regardless of matchup, it's not likely that we see enough fantasy goodness in this divisional showdown against Buffalo to squeeze Tua into our lineups. Though this may seem like an obvious situation to fade for a lot of you, the fact is Tua is still rostered in over 60% of leagues despite missing 5 games, so some out there are certainly considering him in fantasy land. The Bills are currently 5th in schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position, and next week opponents, the Los Angeles Rams, are 12th. What's worse, in weeks 13, 14, and 17, the Dolphins face the Packers, who rank 11th, the Jets, who are 8th, and the Browns, who are 10th. Not only should we be keeping Tua on our benches here in Week 9, it's arguable that he shouldn't even be rostered for the rest of the season.